Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how I installed an AR8000 receiver, a Spektrum receiver, along with telemetry, so that way I can tell what the altitude is of it flying, and that's going to be installed on the DJI, Phantom. This is a great quadcopter. It uses GPS location. It will, once you put GPS lock on it, it will stay in that position. You can set your transmitter down, walk away. It will stay right there where you put it. It also has a fail-safe feature that will make the quadcopter fly back home to the GPS coordinates that were initiated on first takeoff there. And it will land itself. I did the test on it yesterday, and it worked flawlessly. But I wanted to install my own Spektrum receiver, so that way I can use my own DX8 transmitter, and also have telemetry. So I've got the altitude module installed on it. And this video will show you how I installed that altitude module. As you can see, I've got a satellite receiver located here on the bottom, and with that being said, let's get started. Okay, in order to take the cover off, what we have to do here is on each one of the arms there's a screw, just a small screw that we undo here, and there are 3 2mm Allen head screws, the one here and 2 here, and that's on all 4 of the arms. Once you undo those, then you flip it over, the top will come off. I'm not going to do it right here just yet, but the top will come off. You got to be careful of the cord that's connected to the GPS unit located on the top of the top cover, but it pops off real easy. Again, as you're taking that off, just make sure that you don't pull on that cord too much. You don't want to break it. So what I did is, once I got the cover off, I just pulled it out from the NASA controller there, so I had more room to move it around. And alrighty, now let's get into the guts of things. Okay, this is how I have my setup for my AR8000 Spektrum receiver and telemetry module. I haven't hooked them up to the NASA unit just yet. I'm going to end up pulling this. Let me get something else before I cut something with that. I'm going to snip this little zip tie here and pull this up out of the way so I can connect the receiver to the NASA. And I have to make the extensions to do so. Wasn't able to find any extensions male to male at the local hobby store, so we're going to create our own extensions to put over here. And the way we'll hook this up is we will go throttle to T for throttle on the NASA. Aileron, we're going to hook to the A for aileron, and the connections are down below underneath here. Then elevator to E, of course, rudder to R, and then, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll have to look it up, and I'll confirm that here in a little minute, but I think gear is going to the U channel, and aux1 goes to x1, and aux2 goes to x2 on the NASA. And I also, on my telemetry module, I have the altitude sensor, and that's going to get tucked in right behind here, probably right behind this little cable there, or taped up inside here in such a way to where it doesn't interfere with that battery, fall down and interfere with the battery. Then I also hooked up the satellite receiver to the AR8000. Haven't got much room inside, so what I did is I took the cable up underneath, and hopefully you can see it there, and I just taped it off so that way it doesn't get caught up when you put the cover back on. And then I fed it down through the hole on the leg here. So, and then down on the bottom side, it will be I'm going to tape that wire up, and just use some double-sided tape to hold that satellite there. I don't know if it's needed with the TM1000. I don't know if the TM1000 will work as a satellite receiver, but with just this little bitty antenna on top of or on this AR8000, it's not very big. Plus, you have all the electronics up in here too. So, and I had the extra hole in the leg, so I thought I'd just run that satellite receiver to the bottom. And as for the antenna for the telemetry, I just ran that down that leg over there where you've got that auxiliary power cable sticking into. I'm not sure what that auxiliary power cable is. I think you can kind of see it right there, that little wire here. I did read somewhere, it might have been in the manual, that that's just an auxiliary power if for some future upgrade for it. Maybe, I don't know, running a gimbal, I don't know yet. But anyhow, this is how I have things set up in here. I'm going to go ahead and make my extensions and hook up the receiver. And again, I will double check on the gear channel and the aux1 and aux2, but I believe it, again, a gear goes to U, aux1 goes to X1, and aux2 goes to X2 on the NASA. And we'll go from there. Okay, I got all my extensions made, and I've got the receiver hooked up. Just wanted to show you here. I'm reading this right on the NASA. On our bottom row here for the receiver connections, our negative is on the top. Then you have your positive, which is the center pin, and the signal, which is the lower pin. So when you hook up your receiver, you got to make sure that you got those set up right. And on the AR8000 here, our top pin is negative, the middle pin is your positive, and the bottom one was the signal. So when you line these, if you have to make extensions, make sure that you've got your negative going to negative, and so on there. It was a tight fit, so now my next step is going to be hooking up. I don't have an extension, and this one isn't long enough to go all the way around, and I'm all out of connectors to make an extension. So what I'm going to do is use this Y splitter that I've got here as an extension, and I'll just put like a little piece of heat shrink on that just to protect that end there. And that's going to go over into our data port. But before we do that, I'm going to do some double check on how to set up the transmitter and binding into fail-safe mode. It's real important that you do that if you're on this here, so you can still use the GPS go home features and so forth. So I think that was all I was going to say at this point. So let me do that research, and we'll get this hooked up, and we'll after I get that bound up, we will demonstrate how to bind this into fail-safe mode. Okay, I did the research on how to bind the DX8 transmitter to the AR8000 with the telemetry, and I got the radio set up to the recommended settings that I saw in RC groups there, and I'll put a link to the forum thread in the description. So that way you can just click on that and go right to where I did all my research on how to set this up. So I've set up the transmitter already. I'm not going to go into detail on everything that needs to be set up on that. Again, you can get that on the thread link that I have down below on the description of the video. Anyhow, one thing that you're going to want to do in order to get this to bind in the fail-safe mode is you will want to turn on your transmitter, disable the throttle warning that you get for having a high throttle for this model, and put your gear in the up position, or number 1. And again, this is the reason why I say the gear is because of the settings that I've got on my transmitter according to what I found there in RC groups. So if you read that thread there, and you don't have to read far to see what I had set up, it's just the first couple of entries there on the thread. And so I'll have the fail-safe mode on my gear channel. So so when I flip this channel, the switch up, the model's going to go ahead and fly home as if it's lost signal. And so now this is the state that you're going to want that receiver to default to on a loss of signal. So we're going to have greater than 10% power, and our gear or fail-safe return home switch in the active position. So this way, when it loses power, that receiver is going to default to those channels and in those positions, and that's going to send the signal to the NASA to go home. So then also, here's a little tip too I found out. In order to bind with the telemetry unit, you have to push in on the button on the side in order to get it to go into bind mode, but we're not going to want to do that. So what you do is you take a Y connector and put that in the data port here, and have one end going into your telemetry unit. Again, I'm using this Y cable right now because I'm going to need to get an extension. So if you're wondering why that Y cable's there, don't worry about it. Again, before I button this up, I'm just going to put some heat shrink over the end of that, and that will work good for us. And then on the other side of this Y cable, you put your bind plug. This will, when you power up, this is going to put your receiver into bind mode. But before you turn on your transmitter to bind it, what you're going to want to do is remove that jumper. Now it's still going to be in bind mode, but the transmitter, when you turn that on and bind it, this is going to bind that receiver in the fail-safe position that you have set on your transmitter. So again, if you lose signal, that's going to go into greater than 10% power, and your switch is going to be in the fail-safe return home, which is going to send the signal to the NASA to say, hey, you've lost signal, we're going home. So before I do the test flight on this, I will hook this up to the NASA software on the computer, and you can test all of that before you even get this in the air. So as you can see, I also put DIN connector plugs on there. So we are going to power up and get this into bind mode here real quick. I'm just going to set you down while I initialize this, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So we've got it, and we're in a bind mode on our receivers. So I'm going to pull out the bind plug now. Okay, bind plug is out. Turn on my trainer, see if I can do this one-handed, and turn her on and bind. DSMX2, 22 millisecond, and telemetry. Alright, that looks good. Let's check our telemetry. I should have an altitude reading on there somewhere. Oops, I don't have set up. It's flat log. I may have to go in there and set that up too, to where it shows the altitude. But anyhow, we are bound. So now what I'll do is I'll take this, I'll shut everything off, and I'll take this wire out, and then we'll hook it up to the computer, and we'll check all of our channels, make all the channels work, make sure all the channels work. We'll try the go home feature on this to see if it is active when I hook it up to the computer there. Again, we can test all of that. What I'll do before we hook it up to the computer is I'll put everything back together here and make sure that everything fits okay. And we'll go from there. Okay, got everything up and running right now. The Phantom is plugged in. Don't have the cover on just yet because I did have to do some checks on it after I hooked it up to the Assistant here. And yes, that is a toy robot that I have sitting on my desk. My grandkids love their grandpa because of his toys. So, but anyhow, got it hooked up to the Assistant, and one thing that I did have to do, let me see if I can get in there so you can see it, but you go over to Basic Setup after you've hooked up your receiver, and you select RC, and then make sure that you select traditional, or tradition it says there, receiver hookup, because it is defaulted over to the PPM, which is the serial connector that comes with their onboard receiver, which I have taken out too, which is really easy. I just disconnected it and undid a couple of screws and the receiver came out. Matter of fact, I've got it sitting over here. Oops, sorry about that. Yeah, here is their receiver. So I just pulled off the cable off the nozzle, and there's a couple of screws that hold it in place. I figured it was easier to do that than to try to cut that glue and stuff off of there. And I didn't need to use that cable anyway. So I'll just stick this in a drawer someplace. So if I do discover that I've got problems with my receiver or such, I can always mount this back on and go back to stock. Everything I've done so far up to this point, with the exception of putting the Dean's connector on the battery, it can be all taken back out and stock put back in and using the stock transmitter. But anyway, back to our NASA Assistant here. Let's go back to view, and we'll get my transmitter out. Set it here. We are running. We can see that we have rudder control. We have aileron, elevator. It's nice having an assistant like this to where you can test everything, huh? Unlike like say a model airplane or something, really the only way you can test it is do the maiden flight, then you find out afterwards that something's screwed up. Elevator, yep, elevator's working. Ailerons. Now for our switches. Fail safe. The gear switch this up. Fail safe. Down at the bottom, it is showing that it is in fail-safe mode. As we toggle the switch back and forth, we're in attitude mode now. Let's go back up to, hopefully you guys can see this. Let's see, we got mounting, RC, here we go. Right now, we got all switches neutral, or at the home position here. There we go, fail safe, that was the gear switch. That's attitude 1, which puts us into attitude mode, and then we have the other switch here for heading lock and home lock. And then we have GPS mode. All is working well. Let's see what that little pull down tab is. What does that say? Manual. I think what that means that when it's in the flight mode switches at 0, I can be in either manual or attitude. I think I'm just going to leave that in attitude, but as you can see, you can switch that back and forth to manual and mess around with that too to your liking. Battery type LiPo, everything else looks good on this. So now it's just a matter of putting it all back together, doing the final touches on it. And I hope to be doing the maiden flight with all this modifications to it tomorrow. And so I'll be looking forward, or be looking for that video as well. thanks for watching, and I hope this helps. One last thing I'd like to note before I end this video. After you get everything hooked up, you're going to want to hook up your Phantom to your NASA Assistant. Go into Basic and do a calibration of your transmitter. Just all you got to do is just hit the start button on the calibration, and that's underneath the RC tab underneath Basic, and do a calibration. Because I couldn't start the Phantom up because it didn't think that I had my throttle stick down as far, or down to 0 on my stick control. So after doing a calibration, it worked fine. So again, just do your calibration, you hit start, you start to get your indicators jumping all around, and you just take your control sticks and move them in all extremities, and it will register what the travel range is on them, and then you hit the finish, because that will switch over to a finish there. So again, that's it. Just one last final note. Other than that, looks like we are all set. Everything is working as it should. I will also balance those the rotor blades before I put those blades back on. So all right, thanks again for watching.